like first memory,
Right. Yeah.
and
Good
then
starting place.
yeah, and then we can move into the timeline and why you think it's been rewritten and everything.
Right.
All right. Well, if you're ready to start, I'll get going here.
Yep. Anytime.
Today on the show, we have Aria Sulman. He is from paradigmthreat.net. And let me tell you, his research will make you question the paradigm you're living in, because it's some far out stuff. He postulates that Earth's recorded history may be less than 4,000 years. The deep state may run Earth from Mars, and that we may be going through a historic reset civilization right now. I can't wait to dig into all that. Ari, how are you doing?
Hey, doing great. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Well, our first question for our guests is always, what was the rabbit hole that got you started doing this type of research?
Yeah, totally. That's a great starting point. Around 2012, I got hit kind of heavily in Facebook and a bunch of other platforms by a lot of, let's say, call it alternate content or conspiracy content. Mm-hmm. And while a lot of it was fluff, it was all very intriguing and compelling. At the same time, I sort of felt like, life in America is sort of hitting a dead end and starting to sink for a lot of people that I knew. So it just sort of compelled me to take these claims seriously. Since 2012, we saw a lot of weird things happen. We almost went to war with Russia and so forth. And now the dust is settling. We're sort of figuring out why all this happened. So parallel to my starting around that date, I think the reason why all that stuff came out around that time was because Putin in Russia had started distributing a great deal of content, stuff that was exclusive to Russia literature that the West had not seen yet before, like Tataria maps of Eastern Siberia and America before Columbus, pre-Columbian. So all of that stuff, 2012, might have elicited a reaction where they tried to just flood us all out. And so the hardest thing for me has always been, we offer 12 options. Which one is the truth? How do we find the truth? What primers are we using here? They say discern this and discern that, but to get at real truth, you have to have something that can predict the future. Hypothesis, right? Can predict the future and explain things in the past, and not go wrong. If your hypothesis has flaws in it, it'll never become a theory. That's how science is supposed to work. So right. Anyway, I didn't really expect to start getting into my own theories kind of area until about 2 years ago, when I got heavily into Mars and predictive programming in our media, which tells us so much stuff, puts us through our mind, and then just kind of backs it away in the science fiction or fantasy section, which right. is specifically meant to tell us that this is fiction, not real. It's false. That stuff is false. So I started realizing that predictive programming itself could actually be a primer from truth. It could be a way that it could be a grand strategy of covering up truth by putting it in plain sight, letting us know plans ahead of time, really bad plans and not so bad ones, to identify early resistance in the population to get everyone sort of on board with it in the long term. And if this is true, if predictive programming has been sort of this attempt to hide truth, then we could find truth in it, right?
For sure. They always use predictive programming, so I think they can be like, nah, you just saw that in a movie, man. That's exactly not real. Yeah,
exactly.
That's kind of their game,
right? And it seems so silly to point out that stuff like The Simpsons has predictive programming. They're like, what? That's a cartoon, Doesn't matter. It's not real. So
some people say that Matt Groening, I think that's the creator of The Simpsons, right?
Seth MacFarlane.
No.
That's Family Guy. That's Family Guy.
Yeah.
But that they even might have a technology to view the future, and I know the Vatican probably might. I don't know about
We're
all
getting
that.
into Looking Glass now,
right?
And I have to argue with a lot of time traveler believers and stuff. I don't subscribe to it myself. I just have an alternate parallel explanation that's identical to time travel, actually. That there is, like I said, they have to put it in there somewhere for us to at least know about it, so that they identify early resistors. They'll tell us stuff like Agenda 2030, and they'll have stuff like Davos, and they'll just say right to your face, all that stuff we heard them say, we eat bugs and all that. I'm not going to repeat it. They want to know who has a problem with that. And, 90% of the population usually doesn't, which is kind of the problem here. So,
yeah. I feel you on that. It's kind of like a revelation of the method. If they tell you what they're going to
Yes.
do, they won't get like bad karma. I don't know.
Right.
But okay, let's jump into it.
Yeah.
You're big on rewriting the timeline, and you say the world's first memory is this Saturn cosmology, how we used to be a satellite of Saturn.
Right.
Or we've never talked about this on the pod, so could you give our listeners kind of a intro into Saturnian cosmology?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's a cosmology, right? So it's an alternate to the other cosmologies that we've received in school. They will say observational astronomy has showed us this uniformitarianism cosmology of a Big Bang universe created 13.8 billion years ago, with unexplained reasons, and everything just landed the way it is now due to gravity. That's a cosmology. It's a structure of the universe, an explanation. Another explanation, the Bible, right? 6-day creation. They say God created in 6 events or days, all of the things you see today. And without giving the explanation from one event to the next or why that would occur, it's going to be God's will every time. That is a cosmology explanation. Obviously, a lot of people don't, that doesn't sit well with them, and neither does Big Bang. They almost seem eerily similar to each other, like just trust us on this stuff and don't ask any questions. And it starts from the same place, a creator God anyway. So Saturnian cosmology is an alternate, and without being directly related, it's based on the electric universe theory. Saturnian cosmology came out way earlier with Velikovsky, Emmanuel, and other people like David Talbot in the 80s. And then in the 90s, in the late 90s, a bunch of plasma physics came into the arena that wasn't there before. Before the 90s, nobody knew what plasma was aside from, blood plasma. Right. Which blood plasma, of course, is named after something we see in space and in those balls of plasma. It's named after that because that's the 4th state of matter. Some people say the 1st state of matter. And plasma physics might actually be the underlying explanation for all that weird Saturnian cosmology that we don't know where to place. So plasma physics or electromagnetic physics is a different explanation for why planets are, orbiting in the structure that we see. That has nothing to do with gravity. It has everything to do with balance and repulsion and attraction, where gravity is actually more of a repulsion force in the universe than it is a attraction force. Quite the opposite of what we're taught in school, basically. And that's electric universe theory. So if anyone wants to look that up, just type it in Google. It's a lot of references. And for lab experiments, you can look up the Sapphire project.
Yes, love them.
Right, aren't they great? And they basically did the plasma physics in labs, and they're able to reproduce electric scarring at any scale. Scale means if you can make a mountain with a laser or electrode, you can do the same thing in real life at a much grander scale. The Sapphire project has a physical explanation for why mountains form and why canyons form as well. Usually it's mountains, because mountains are the attractive, positive association that planets and large objects have with each other. And canyons are a negative form of the same energy. A positive form pulls mountains up, and negative carves into the ground. This is all, like I said, reproduced in Sapphire projects. Very fascinating stuff. So that gives you the underlying for what Saturnian cosmology is. Now, ignoring all of that inductive support for this cosmology, you can look at it at face value and say, this is what our ancestors said they saw. And not just 1 or 2 civilizations out there, but it seems all civilizations have the same story. That one movie, The Fountain, has that premise of that movie is based on the idea that the Mayans had the same origin story as the Christians. Wow, mind blown. Of course, it's science fiction, so we're not supposed to take it seriously. Right. But
you saw that in a movie, Ari.
Exactly. And if you go on a forum and you say that Greek and Roman gods are the same thing, right, you'll have just a bunch of reactions to say absolutely not. Even though the pantheon isn't 100% matched, with the exception of Janus. Yeah, Janus doesn't appear in Greek. But you'll see people go paranoid about this stuff. They'll say no connection. Civilizations had no connection, no similar stories, nothing. And that's just well, no, it's not true. We actually see a lot of it. We see a lot of similar stories. David Talbot calls them archetypes. Archetype is something that's unique to a storyline, like a king, a good king, or a bad king, or a witch, or something like that, that we can find parallels in stories across civilizations, even if the names are different. Now you're Rapunzel, now you're, whatever, Joan of Arc, not her original name. So to the point, Saturnian cosmology is what our ancestors of all planet Earth said happened. Simple as that. And they say that the first memory basically started with this creation event. Creation event is when, in all cosmologies, actually we see it. In Big Bang cosmology, it's called Let There Be Light. It's the first time anyone saw light here on Earth. So how did this happen? To get into the physics behind it, and this is not something that Sapphire or anyone talks about, this is just hypothetical. If you want to find cutting edge research on this, look up, I should have his name ready. That British guy, man, blanking. It's been a while since I talked about it.
Yeah, that's right.
I'm gonna look him up. It's just so embarrassing that I don't actually know this guy. Walt Thornhill.
Walt Thornhill, yes.
God, should really just, yeah. So Walt Thornhill, he explains this stuff like today. He gives speeches. He says suns are hollow. They're plasma oriented. They all kinds of crazy stuff, and he's not really accepted. The science isn't accepted yet. So how does a planet get born? How's that happen? Funny story, I was in the Arizona State Fair and I randomly saw this video of this huge black object coming out of our sun in a video with these tendrils, umbilicals sticking out of it, and then all of a sudden the whole thing rips apart and flies out.
Yeah, I've seen it.
Right? What is that?
It's a crazy video.
Yeah. So I go on Facebook, I'm like, what is that? And some people are like, that's a planet being born. Other people are like, no. These are Birkeland currents appearing a certain way.
Right.
The Birkeland current theory is not it, because that would imply that Birkeland currents cut off at a certain point. They do not. They're currents. They go all the way to the other source. So their explanation doesn't follow, and there's big black objects coming out of our sun. Well, Thornhill goes into explanation of how this happens. But they're only black because we're seeing them at reduced exposure. He says, inside of our sun, we have this sort of machine, this factory of planet creation. The light material on the surface, hydrogen, helium, becomes heavier with fusion. That's all true. The heavy elements falls into the core of the sun, magnetically, not gravity. And at some layer, it gets stuck there. And inside the sun, apparently, there's this other area. I've read books, literatures that explain they can actually travel into the sun and live there if you wanted to. Funny stuff. Maybe true, maybe not. But the point is, there's something going on in the sun that's not so hot. That's where the heavy metals fall and they get cooler. They become planets. And these are dead planets. They're just seedlings. They have the ability to, create life with the right circumstances, but they're not there yet, not in the sun. So eventually, due to electromagnetic repulsion, imbalance with having too many objects inside, they come out. They're just forced right out. We see that in that video. And we also see this in literature when Saturn, Kronos, gobbled up all of its planetoids that it recently birthed. It gobbled them up.
Kids, and then
its own kids, and then Zeus too big, and it intervenes, and Kronos spits them all out. So we see this happening there and there. We see reference for this happening. Electromagnetic repulsion. It's basically too much stuff inside, and they start to wobble and they just break out. So this type of seedling planet was the first iteration of Earth. It was proto-Earth.
Was it just like a hunk of rock, basically? Or
right. It leaves the sun and it wanders in our solar system, outer solar system, and it gathers all this other substance, plasma mostly. What it does is eventually gets captured by a plasma brown dwarf system. This is Saturn. It's a big multi-layered plasma dwarf that gobbles up other planets, extremely negatively charged on its outside, our sun being positively charged. Saturn eventually gets so big as a brown dwarf that it forces a path straight into the sun and connects, positive to negative. But this energy, of course, flows into Saturn, changing its polarity. It's not going to be a negative object anymore. It's going to be a positive object inside the sun's environment. This change from negative to positive forces Saturn to rip out its outer layer of plasma. When cooled, this is salt water and stuff, same kind of stuff you find in Saturn's rings right now. A combination of salt and water is identical to our oceans. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, and scientists don't have an explanation of where all the salt in our oceans came from. So.
Yeah, It's not from under the ocean. We can find a source for it. It's evenly spread out. So yeah, this outer layer breaks off of Saturn and becomes Jupiter. It also becomes Neptune, Uranus, Venus, all of the gas giants and the gas dwarf Venus. Why? Because these are plasma bodies, and Mars, Earth, and Mercury are rock bodies. That show third rock from the sun. Sorry, no. Earth is the second rock from the sun. Venus is not a rock. They land probes on there. Sure. No, literature says Venus is not a rock. It is something else. It's a big plasma dragon. Earth was actually the only rock. It was the only thing in the Saturn brown dwarf that had rock structure from it, hard, heavy metals forged in the sun. This hard rock surrounded by plasma. This is how it all started. When this connected to the sun, this hard rock started receiving this energy. The Earth received energy from the North Pole straight through it into the South Pole. It started developing spin. It started having night and day cycles. And it began what is later called the collinear configuration. Collinear configuration seen in literature, again, all civilizations say that the planets at one point were in a straight line from the sun all the way out to the end. Maybe I'll share. I'll start giving some examples of what I'm talking about. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, man.
It's like in that movie, the Disney movie Hercules, when the planets align, he has one chance,
Yeah, it's in our literature, absolutely.
Yeah.
So where is share? I don't see it anywhere. Oh, there's. Oh my God, it's right in front of me. Oh, can you enable that real fast? And we'll get that going.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to get into the diagrams to make this a lot easier to understand.
How do I do that? It's not on my options for you.
No. Oh. It says host disabled, participation sharing, screen sharing. If it's not working, then we'll just not worry about it.
Yeah. We'll just not worry about it because our listeners won't be able to see it.
Oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. So skip all that. So collinear configuration. This is what David Talbot talks about as the first memory of Earth. When light first showed up on Earth, before that, there was no life on Earth. There was no ability to have life. There wasn't enough energy flowing through the Earth yet. This connection to our sun is what caused life to start in abundance. And that with that life, you have the need for a first memory. There's no need to remember anything when you're not alive yet. If you catch what I'm meaning, seeds have no memory. Mm-hmm. With this first memory, everyone on Earth looks up in the North Pole and they see Mars, behind it Venus, and behind it Saturn, a big yellow circle. Behind Saturn is Jupiter, but they can't see that. And behind Jupiter is our sun, which they also cannot see. This configuration shows up in many different artifacts, literature. You got Greek atlas holding up the world. He's holding Saturn up. You got there's tablets, Sumerian tablets.
Right.
They show a mountain, they show a sun at the top. And people are like, oh, that's Anunnaki and stuff. No, the Anunnaki are depictions. These are big humans, of course, but they're just giants. They're human sized. They're not gods. They're not associated with the deities that they perceive up in heaven. They see heaven up there and they're just big humans down the ground. So you see this mountain of heaven all over the place. You also see it in, St. Petersburg. The entire St. Petersburg is shaped like the mountain of heaven. You see it in Egyptian literature. You see it in that new Alice in Wonderland movie in the cover. It's everywhere. Once you see the cosmic mountain, you start to see it. There's a really cool place where it's in Big Lebowski in the bullying scene. Really cool.
Really?
Yeah. Check that out. Once you see it, you can't unsee this stuff. So more fun. Let's go to Norse mythology. Again, the same memory. Norse mythology remembers all of the planets in a configuration. It actually remembers something called the Rainbow Bridge, the Bifrost.
Bifrost, yeah.
Yeah, Bifrost in Western, and that they can travel on this Bifrost. The Thor movies make a big deal of that. Mm-hmm. The Bifrost is a Brooklyn current. It's a big rainbow that you expect that is coursing energy through the planets, through Mars to Earth. If you go up at the North Pole of Earth, you'll see a big Brooklyn current that goes right to Mars. If you were to walk in it, the Rainbow Bridge, looking for the pot of gold, all of those myths. If you were to walk into this Birkeland current, assuming you had the right stone set up and the right structure, you could actually teleport to the other side. Again, it's in the literature. You got this in Egyptian.
It's like a Stargate that you hear in all kinds of other mythology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like the movie Stargate makes a big deal about, pyramids potentially having something to do with this teleportation stuff.
We can definitely get into that later too.
Yeah, and they joke around about how it's done. So yeah, Norse mythology sort of tells us what each planet was. They say like there's one hot place called look at here, Jotunheim. No, cold place. Sorry, Jotunheim, cold place.
Right, cold. Guard here.
And that you find giants there. You find the frost giants.
Mm-hmm.
The explanation for this is that Mars was growing at a much faster rate than Earth. Mars actually got its body from Earth. Like I said, there was no Mars before. And Mercury got its body from the south side of Earth. Mars is growing just suddenly really fast in a pretty stable location. On the top of it, you got this pure energy right into Saturn, into the sun. Perfect place to live. I'm guessing that's where Atlantis is. I've heard this many times that Atlantis and the ruins of Atlantis are on the North Pole of Mars, not Earth. That makes sense to me because that's as high that you could possibly step without, you can't go any higher than that. But the south side is a cold place with giants. So it's the same planet, Mars. One side is beautiful and the other side had cold frost giants. So you can see that each of these realms were actually different, and Norse mythology simply remembers them as they were. They're too big for anyone to tell what they were. We're like ant-sized at the time compared to these planets.
So like all the mythology of Atlantis being somewhere on Earth, would the mythology around the location of where this might just be the quote Rainbow Bridge or the Stargate to where you would go in order to access this place?
Well, here's how the story goes. As Talbot tells it, and how I believe it too, this collinear configuration created the golden age, the perfect time to exist. Right. Civilization only had a few hundred years to enjoy it, of our years. Their years are very short at the time. And they built some stuff up. They didn't have any death. They didn't need to eat any food. They experimented with gems. What do we call it? Emeralds. They built emerald cities. Right. And because you can grow emeralds and cut them into any shape, they're going to bring that stuff back. It's really cool stuff. Emeralds can contain memory, contain video, audio, you name it. They figured it all out back then.
About crystals.
Right. So then it fell apart. The whole thing fell apart. The Tower of Babel collapsed. The Golden Age ended. There's a lot of different explanations for it.
Now, how long ago was this? Was it like 4,000 years ago? Is that what you're?
Most of them agree that the starting date for this, we should say, is around 4077 BCE.
Okay.
I'm going to get into why the BCE timeline is warped and the AD timeline is also warped. But yes, we can't jump around and start changing it now because we will lose all of our reference points in literature. Right. Right. So yeah, 4077 BCE, which I believe is around 4,000 years ago, not 6,000, was when the Golden Age started. Then in 3147 BCE, short years, roughly about 800 short years later, the whole thing ends. Collinear configuration grows too big. There's too much energy coursing through it. The planets wobble and they just leave the configuration.
Yeah. So this collinear configuration, and we're looking at Saturn, is that where this black cube worship comes from? Because the black hexagon on the North Pole of Saturn?
It's possible that they would have seen some kind of hexagon at the time, but that would be on the south side. So it's interesting. We've only seen it on the north side since the collinear configuration broke apart. One piece of literature, Talbot goes into extensively, Greeks, they say that the atlas of the world went from the top of the, how they have the atlas with north and south, went from the top to the bottom, went to the other side of the, I forget the term for it. The Greek literature says Saturn went from the North Pole to the South Pole. That's what they say. And that means that as the planets are scattering and we can actually observe them, all sides of them with telescopes for the first time, it was now time to form a new icon. We see this black cube / hexagon in the North Pole of Saturn, and Saturn created Earth. So as simple as that, that's a cube worth worshiping to a lot of people. Before it became a symbol of evil to a lot of people, it was actually in the Rus Horde Tatarian Empire. It was just a place, you go and you worship. No one, it wasn't associated with evil back then, only much more recently. So Golden Age ends. great deluge happens, the planets crash through Saturn's outside layers 3 times, 3 great deluges, not just one. Each time, civilization has to survive it and then recover. Without the collinear configuration, suddenly everything is different. People are experiencing mass death for the first time. Animals have started eating each other when it's not their nature to do that. It's survival of the fittest straight up. And even to the point that some people are having trouble having kids. It's not working anymore. Inevitably, people turn to what we can now start calling the deep state, because the deep state hides its locations deep. It's within everyone's culture. It wants to be in charge of things like science, math, money. And they will say, let's say who they are first. First, we got these advanced humans on Atlantis. And then when the collinear configuration came apart, Atlantis fell. We all have references of Atlantis falling. It's this sad event. So that was a deep state losing everything they had. They took it pretty hard, and not all of them, but some of them decided to not share that stuff anymore in the future. They, of course, could have. And the decision to not share them makes them the deep state. Starting from that point, they told the people, you worship us, you listen to us as the priests. We represent the creator God who's mad at us, who's constantly destroying its own creation for some reason. And you got to come to us if you want answers, if you want to figure out how to, get crops to grow and stuff like that. And, maybe they didn't have the answers, but they got people to sacrifice their kids, animal sacrifice, all that kind of stuff. Baal worship back then in the Dark Ages, or the beginning of the end of the Golden Age, the beginning of the Dark Age. Mm-hmm. This Dark Age also is referenced in Arthurian legend. The sword and the stone, again, was the collinear configuration. The Grail, again, is the collinear configuration. And when the Holy Grail disappeared, everything went to crap. Seasons and stuff formed, and none of the crops could grow anymore. And people were like, where did the Holy Grail go? Where did the sword that was protecting us go? So all these legends come from that. And what you have is somebody picked up the sword. Who is it? It's Jupiter. It's the planet Jupiter. Why? Because now you got all the planets in a non-linear configuration. They're orbiting each other while at the same time orbiting the sun. They've just recently scattered, but they're still connected north to south pole, and they're not like letting each other go yet. Jupiter shows up to intervene, and hold on a second, I got a cat situation.
We've been there, man.
Yeah, I know. So as the planets, are stuck in darkness, they can't see outside their atmosphere. It's a really bad time. Suddenly the sky clears and Jupiter shows up, and all civilizations on Earth start to reference Jupiter as the good king, the one that picked up the sword or whatever, and brought the land, to stability and harmony. The good king then dies after a couple hundred years. The good king, there's a cat. Yeah, as long as he doesn't touch the thing, then I'm fine.
Well, the good news is we're not on video cast, so.
Right. So the good king is the original savior, the original Osiris, for example, after Ra. Ra was Saturn, and I believe Osiris is Jupiter. And it comes later and takes over for Osiris in all of the literatures. For Saturn, and just stabilizes things. Then, as we know in Arthurian legend, King Arthur gets sick. He loses whatever, and the land loses along with him. Suddenly the crops and everything stop growing, and the people get the plague, and it just gets really bad. So this is, of course, a metaphor for what's happening on Earth. This nonlinear configuration is not stable. It's changing all the time. Mars, Venus, Jupiter, and Earth, and a bunch of other debris are all vying for position in electromagnetic arena. Mars and Venus are constantly going to war. Mars being Lancelot, sorry, I always pronounce it wrong. The biggest knight of all, the one that had no equal. And Venus, of course, representing many female references in literature, in this case, Guinevere. And that Lancelot and Guinevere somehow ruin the stability of the round table. It breaks apart. So all of that is just explaining what the planets are going through. After the nonlinear configuration finally breaks apart, that's when each planet finds its own final orbit. The big planets, Saturn and Jupiter, they go into the outer solar system. Inner solar system, we got Mercury, Earth, Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. Right. And like I said, Mercury was there all along. Mercury and Mars were there all along. So let me just back up a little bit into Mercury's story. On the southern hemisphere, You got literature saying that they saw the first man, a stick figure that looked like a man. Sometimes it had a duck head, sometimes it had extra arms. It's interesting how extra arms makes it a bug and not extra arms makes it a mammal. It's like electric things seen in the sky actually mimic life in so many ways. This first man, Adam, in the Bible, of course, was really just plasmoids. Anthony Pratt is the one that goes extensively about these plasmoids in reference in literature, especially here in America, in North America and South. The plasmoids were Uranus, Neptune, and Mercury. The plasmoids were extremely bright, and they were so hot. Norse and a few other literatures say that nobody that could not stand it were ever going to live there, that visitors would leave immediately. And that the people that lived there, they sort of earned it because they got all this dark skin and pigmentation, and they could stand it. And it doesn't mean that Black people can stand the sun or anything like that. It just means that these were the first humans on the south side to decide to live on the south side where it's really hot. And the people who lived on the north side did so because conditions were a little bit better, closer to Saturn and the sun, and further away from the crazy end point of our collinear configuration. So this first man falls apart. Adam falls apart. The rib of Adam comes apart and becomes women. It all makes sense once you look at it as not a human at all, just a big plasmoid. They fall to the sky, to the ground, and make the humans. That's what Bible says. That's what the Mayan myths say as well. So it's metaphor. It's just this first man was necessary for the Earth to finally grow into what it is, into its own orbit, into its own life and future and all that. So yeah, that's the south side. So Mercury, being so hot, it was a little bit different from Mars. It was, instead of being visible and red and hitting us with its atmosphere, it was white and hot and forming a different element. It was forming mercury instead of phosphorus and sulfur, like Mars was. Mars was simply forming this because it was different temperature with different energy passing through it. This is alchemy. So mercury and phosphorus is very interesting. If you know about those two substances, they're very different. They form under different circumstances. And you put them together, you got the phosphorus stone, you got silver, you got gold. Very cool stuff.
They are very important in alchemy.
Yeah. So fast forwarding into the future, the configuration breaks apart. We got this normal stability that we see today. The planet stopped forming. There's no more events that could be associated with any deities. And the people forget everything because it turns out that deep state wanted to control this memory. They wanted to preserve it. They sort of were after anyone else that had the same memory, to the point that we're here in the 21st century. We're almost after anyone that doesn't agree with, say, NASA and Judeo-Christian religion.
Right.
So that's where the timeline, gets murky. I believe that the year 0 represents when the calendar stopped changing, could not change anymore. As we jumped orbit, our years got longer and the calendars had to keep getting rewritten. Year 0 should be when we stopped doing that. So when was it? Was it year 0? No. Year 688 was the last time we had any interactions that changed our calendar. According to Janot Cook, the author. I could be wrong about a lot of these. I rely a lot about him on the early states, but he's really extensive with his research. And if that's true, then that means the calendar year 0 should be 680 BC. That's when, everything stabilized, fixed calendar. We can do 365 days, got a leap year. We can do 13 months, which is the original calendar. If you look up international fixed calendar, you can see that 28 days, 13 months, beautiful.
Goes also, off.
Right, yeah. So then when is year 0 AD? So what does AD stand for? So now we're getting into the whole other thing, Now the gods, the planets are gone. Now it's all strictly human affairs, and we're fighting over our modern civilization history. Does it start at year 0, after death of Christ? Well, then who is Christ? Let's just start defining these things, or we're never going to get to the end of it.
Sure.
So the big conclusion, I'm just going to give you the big teaser here, is that Western Europe and America, we stole all of our history, our religion, everything from the East. We stole it from Russia. And Russia is the source of a lot of this stuff. So actually, our story begins in Russia, in Crimea. Again, Putin took Crimea in 2012, very relevant.
Yeah.
They say in Russia, that's where Jesus was born. His name wasn't Jesus. There was no J in the Greek alphabet or Cyrillic alphabet. J is Latin. It's completely from Latin, which came later. Jesuits spread the letter J. His name was Andronicus Christ. Christ means anointed one. It doesn't mean anything else than that. It means anointed one. You know, like chrysanthemum, the plants, anointed plants. That's about it. And why was he anointed? Well, yeah, there was something special about him. He had a virgin birth, recorded in 3 different literatures. One of them, what's the other word for atheist? The other one, sorry, secular. Now, atheist is a totally loaded term. Secular version of the Jesus story actually shows Mary going out into the village and saying, I got pregnant, I don't know how. Mary and her family are part of the Rus-Horde Tatarian Empire before it was formed. It wasn't an empire yet. It was just this big old Siberian expanse, and they were giants. All of them were giants. In the west, you got the midgets. In the east, you got the giants. And Jesus and his family traveled west. They went to Istanbul. They went to the holiest place around, the Jerusalem that was rebuilt here on earth to model the Jerusalem in heaven of that collinear configuration. First Jerusalem was in Istanbul, not Palestine. It was on the Bosphorus River. The ruins are still there. It's also called Yoros or Troy in Western. And Troy, of course, is the same location as Jerusalem. Yerushalayim in Hebrew is Yoros, is Troy. The Battle of Troy, the Trojan War, is the same war as the Crusades. Again, this research, I'm going to just point to, what's the name? The Russian guy.
Anatoly Fomenko.
Thank you. I'm really blanking today.
You're good.
Yeah, so Anatoly Fomenko has made all these claims. Putin and a lot of Russians are backing him. I don't see any reason to doubt them. They make a lot of sense. So let's get back to the story. He explains that the Crusades are the first war, the first religious war, the first reason that anyone would have a war. And that makes a lot of sense to me. That makes more sense than the Age of Empires, explanation that we've given, where humans can't stop killing each other, or even
Right.
the ancient Chinese history. We've seen all those games, and it's just slaughter, thousands, millions of people. That doesn't sit well with me. I don't think you can get humans to march to other countries and kill women, children, other people, and leave their own families behind. It's just not, doesn't make sense to me. The first war had to be fought for the first reason. First reason was a religious schism. So how do we get there? Christ went from Crimea to Istanbul, and he said, hey guys, I hear what you're saying. You guys represent the Old Testament. We should worship God and make sacrifices, do usury, circumcision, baptism, belief in the resurrected deity, and all these kind of things. But us here in the West, in the East, we don't really do that kind of stuff. We are polytheistic. You guys in the West, monotheistic. In the East, Greek Orthodox Church people before modern times were polytheistic. And they worshipped all the gods. They had one day of the week for each one, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and the month, right, Saturday. And no one was left out. And they had I'll jump ahead there. So these guys were in just complete contradiction to what the deep state was trying to teach at the time. This is the deep state's Old Testament religion, straight out of Egypt. Can we skip the whole Egypt part? That's okay. Deep state went from Atlantis to Egypt, and then they exited from Egypt when everything fell apart. And it's unlivable in Africa, and they moved into Europe. And all of their history is in Western Europe. From Egypt to Western Europe, there are artifacts and everything. You find Egyptian artifacts in the Vatican, and then they went with Columbus to America. You find Egyptian artifacts here in America and in London.
You still see obelisks everywhere in London.
Right.
In
So
Washington,
this tells them exactly where they moved and who they are. So go back to the story. So Eastern religion, and this is about 1,000 years ago of our current years. According to Fomenko again, the 11th century, this is when it all begins. Jesus lived in the 11th century. He goes to Istanbul and they say, you cannot talk like that. You are banished, get out of here. This story is recorded in the Bible. King Herod or somebody banishes the entire family and they have to go back to where they came from. Then the prodigal child returns to Istanbul at some point, and he's a big giant and he's not really afraid of anyone. He has a huge following over there. The people he left behind, they remembered what he said, and he has created this huge problem. they're asking him to come back and join the Passover, passing over Venus, the Exodus story. And then they're going to basically betray him. So what is going on here? Why did Christ get crucified? The religious orthodoxy of Istanbul, the Western orthodoxy of the Old Testament, had to sort of false flag a lie saying that he is actually claiming to be the Son of God, the resurrected deity that we're all telling you guys to worship. So connect, and all of a sudden we have this narrative that works on the more loyal, and they're just like, okay, fine, we got to do something. No one's willing to kill this giant. And I do not believe that Jesus dies on the cross. They have to go through a lot of embellishment to explain how he was killed by a spear. But in reality, what you're talking about is the first big public punishment. Everyone's going to see it. It's right there in Istanbul, in the Euros, in the castle. This Troy, very high walls, impenetrable castle. If you look at today, the castle has 3 walls. I'm sorry, if you look at the history of it, the ruins don't show that, but had 3 walls. You have to get past all 3 walls. This castle is actually depicted in Lord of the Rings as Minas Tirith, White Castle, exactly the same, except it was on a river. And it's also the original. Well, okay, getting off topic. So you got this big castle, and you got Christ crucified right there. This is sort of a message to the East: do not spread your religion to us. If you do, we're going to do this to you, and it just gets everyone back in line. I believe that his family takes him off the cross when it's over. That he cooperated with it because he didn't have a choice; he was going to start a war otherwise, and that they took him back. He went to the East. So many references of Jesus going back to the East, winding up in places like China, Japan, Russia, the islands,
maybe even America,
and maybe even America.
That's what the Mormons say.
The Mormons say that they talked to him here, and it's like, here's the 3 speeches I gave here in America, and so forth. Yeah, why not? Sure. He's a crippled guy, but he had a lot of big following at that point. He was going to get everywhere. Fast forward. Something bad happens here. The story should have ended here. But as I believe, the nefarious forces at work was that deep state trying to regain control of people, whether or not they're humans broke away on Mars or whether or not they're right here on Earth. It doesn't really matter to me. All that matters is that there was an intent to do that, and you can see it. There's a couple clues to where it is. For example, Christ said, you guys don't need to do usury. That's a bad thing. Charging people taxes leads to poverty and everything else. And then right after that, you see the Rus Horde Empire, doing taxes on people. So it's just, they didn't learn their lesson or something. No, here's what happens. When Christ went back to the East, somebody drummed up the East into a frenzy, the First Crusade. They got an army together, and within 10 years, they went all the way back to Istanbul, and they took Troy, they took Jerusalem back from the heathens that had done something terrible. They conquered that location, and then they just stopped. They said, we're done. We got it, but we need you guys to never do this again. So we're going to impose usury on you. We're going to make you a vassal state, the first vassal state, Turkey. And we're going to, you're going to have to pay tribute to us. This history was stolen as the Roman Empire. We hear all about the Roman Empire making everyone vassal states. They didn't do it out of punishment, and they didn't do it through a crusade. They did it because they're so popular. They had this righteous narrative. This just like, look at what they did to us, and we fought them back, and now we're in charge, and our religion's better, and just all kinds of stuff like that. Rus Horde Empire spreads all over the world within 100 years without any kind of, aggressive tactics. Right, without any tricks. Mm-hmm. And they do the right thing. They give everyone their culture. They say, you guys can maintain everything. India, let's build some big palaces, and in ancient China, there is some stuff there, like the Forbidden Temple, which has been there a long time.
Right.
So Rus Horde Tatarian Empire forms in the 12th century, spreads all over the planet. Within 2 centuries, it has all this drama. It encounters resistance in Western Europe, people saying, no, we want to go back to Old Testament religion. In fact, I was contacted by, this angel, that angel, the Joan of Arc story. I was contacted by a saint. I believe a spirit is talking to me and telling me what to do. This is an interesting reference point. We see this all over the place. We see this in the jinn literature in the Quran. We see spirits trying to get societies to betray their own people for wealth and power to become king. We see it in freaking the Aladdin movie. So this nefarious force, yeah, they could have all really just been crazy, but I think a better explanation is telepathy. You know, we're forgetting there's this whole other planet out there, Mars, and every 36 months, 26 months, Earth and Mars go into opposition. They go right next to each other, and their electromagnetic fields bump up against each other, allowing for connections, very simple connections, telepathy, energy, easy travel, that kind of stuff. And if you connect telepathy and the potential of that into world history, you see that these heretics probably were talking to somebody, and they were being burned at the stake and lynched and stuff because what they were saying was so scary and threatening. And the villagers usually had reference points of this happening in other places and it ending very poorly. The Rus Horde Empire has to react to this heretic situation, and they create the Inquisition. They go all the way to west. They go to Spain. They send orders to Spain. Didn't start there. And they say, here's what you're going to do. You're going to create police force. You're going to arrest people who are public disturbances. You're going to put them in jail. You're going to interrogate them and try to figure out who they're talking to and why. And our goal of all of this Inquisition is to avoid death, avoid burnings, avoid lynchings, avoid all the stuff that people are going to do all by themselves if you leave them to their own stuff. Inquisition in Western literature has this terrible reputation. All this stuff, which is not really easy to prove, about people being tortured in order to convert them, Muslims and Jews, over to Christianity. Very dubious and has a lot of contradictions in that one. And more to the point, the real Inquisition, and as Russians would probably say today, wasn't so bad. And yeah, there were a bunch of heretics, but you know, you gotta look at what's going on here. This big picture of it. They were speaking to an invisible something, and that would seem like a heretic to anyone in the East. So, next step, next century, around the 15th century, something bad happens, and you start having hero heretics that just totally win battles against the Rus Horde Empire. Joan of Arc, or Deborah of the Bible, is a perfect example. These people have multiple names, right? You got Western name, you got Eastern name, and you got the secular version too. Right. And everyone just has different names. And so the Jewish version is Deborah of the Bible, the only judge of the Bible, only female judge, the rest are men. And Joan of Arc story is that she got a vision from an invisible source to go to war. And it took me a long time to accept this could be the case. I thought it was some kind of rewrite, but there's so much stuff there. And she does this, and it just drives everyone crazy. She's charismatic. She seems to be right. God does seem to be on their side sometimes. They win battles in weird ways. And she meets her fate in England as a heretic. Again, the Rus Horde Empire is being forced to do these things, but they don't have control in the distant lands that much anymore. Even their own empire vassals are starting to be rather evil, and they will do things like burn people at the stake, which is not illegal. You're not supposed to do that. Next thing happens. Next thing you expect to happen is the Rus Horde Empire starts to shake. It starts to have a real breaking up in its highest levels, in its royal class. This book is in the Bible also. It's the book of Esther. You know, Esther is the Jewess that represents the West heretic side of things, and everyone else is sort of like Orthodox polytheistic. And you got this war between the polys and the monos, which leads to bloodshed. The first tragic incident, a bunch of generals were assassinated in the Rus Horde Empire. Exactly the same story as episode 3 of Star Wars, by the way. A bunch of Jedi's getting assassinated all at once, leading to the fall. It's all there. It's all the same. The generals are wiped out. The heretics take over the Russian Empire. Eventually, the king talks to his old wife, who he banished again, and they make up and they say, we got to do something. And this other side happens, and all of the Jews are wiped out of Russia. And this is about 16th century. With the I don't have the names here, but yeah, I'll just forget the names for now. 16th century, the royalty starts to have some trouble.
You were doing an amazing job articulating all this. I don't know how you remember all of it. I have a couple more questions for you.
Go for it.
Do you want to tell the people where they can find you and all your work before we get to the end?
Yeah, it's in paradigmthreat.net. You can find our Discord link and just come talk to us. We got a big community forming on Discord.
There you go.
There.
Go get
Yeah.
on his Discord. My last question is about the mud flood.
Oh yeah.
I know you believe it was some sort of electrical event caused that. Can you
Right.
go into your
Yeah. Sorry,
theory?
the story is so long. I'm gonna wrap up.
You're good. You're good.
Dude,
Yeah.
we're gonna have to do a part 2.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
man.
It is. I mean,
Yeah.
Right. So it's the interesting part. So that Roosevelt Empire falls apart. The Jesuits form in the West, and they start spreading all over the planet, taking over what the Roosevelt Empire used to have. Jesuits. This is 17th century, and sorry, 18th century. Jesuits have reached everywhere. They got to Africa, and they're telling the slaves that Osiris has returned. They rebuild the Sphinx. I'm covering a lot of stuff here. What I believe happened was something completely ruined the plan, the Jesuit plan to spread monotheism all over the planet and conquer every indigenous religion. This is Napoleon. He was sort of a bystander in the French Revolution, 10 years of just horrible, the French had enough with their leaders, tried everything. And he's left in this huge power vacuum. He has no choice but to declare himself emperor against the Tsar's declaration 3 years earlier. And he got East and West about to go to war in this battle of 1812. And at the exact same time here in America, we got the battle of 1812. You know, they're supposed to be unrelated. Same war. This is World War Zero. It's the first World War. And this is a very different war than we think it is. Napoleon used all of the advanced technology of the deep state to turn the tide of what they were creating on Earth. Got rid of all that Jesuitism, gave everyone all their religions back. And he had advanced technology. He had stuff like airships. There's paintings of Napoleon's short army of by the thousands getting into these giant wooden airships and going into the sky. So you can see how they had no problem crossing the Alps. They went into Russia and they conquered it. Real history says that the Tsar burned down the Kremlin and that the Russian army lost 420,000 people, 390,000 in the winter situation without having resources and stuff. But that's just doesn't make sense. These guys were pretty war hardened to cross the Alps. They knew what they're doing. They had resources. So we got to look at the Battle of 1812. That's not what happened. Something else happened. And right after the 1812, we have this weird memory called the mud flood. Sort of like all memory resets, and we have this other world. Crimes of the 19th century get pushed back 15th, 12th centuries, way back. The Bible is rewritten once again to include a lot of current stuff. So what could have possibly caused a mud flood? Well, my theory is the mud flood energy events, right? You got to look for the energy, or you can't explain why the mud had moved. If it's a shovel or if it's something else, you have to find the energy. So for it to be a one world event, which is what a lot of people say it is the theory of the mud flood is that it was one world event, not a bunch of unrelated events like drilling in mountains and stuff, but one event that has been erased from memory. And if that's true, then you got to look for the energy. So I call it the directed energy theory. Somehow there's a lot of energy directed at certain locations in the earth. They reversed the victories of Napoleon, took out all of his allied kingdoms, and a bunch of other kingdoms like Mu and the North Ireland kingdoms, which were huge back then. Took out all the giants. The Book of Mormon references, you know, God showing up and taking out the giants because they were, mean or wicked or whatever, and even making the Native American skin red. I mean, that's a crazy. You know, I gotta look at that. And then you find all this evidence of mud flood here in America, just like there's a layer over our past history. You find out that the Roosevelt Empire used to be here before Columbus, and we're not talking about Native Americans. We're talking about, you know, a world empire, just every kind of person. It's eclectic. One thing I'll throw out there, it seems that the mud flood event was a big reorganization of human population on Earth. Everyone has moved to a new location based on your skin color for the most part. If you look at pre-Civil War America, you'll see that the trains had orders. White people north, black people south. Those were orders from somebody, who knows who. That's what the orphan trains were doing. And black people were moved out of North Africa and Egypt and moved to Sierra Leone. Indians were moved out of India. Where's India? That's America. That's what the Columbus story tells us, that they thought this place was called India. And it wasn't Europe because they would expect to find China, not India. This America used to be called India, and the Indians here were mass relocated to a new place called India. The Asians of the North were also mass relocated and repopulated in China. The evidence of this, mostly you start digging into the mud flood, you see the orphan train tracks built all over the planet. Yeah, crazy stuff that has to be explained somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that event, 1812, leading to the mud flood, is what I believe was the first reset of civilization. they got everything organized the way they want. Things might be falling apart now, and we're looking at potentially them attempting to reset again to stay in power. They probably did try this in the past too.
Yeah, it's scary to think about what they're going to try to do in the next 10 years or so, because their plans are definitely rolling out. Like you said in the beginning, we can see it with Agenda 2030 and all these unelected groups making the big decisions. But
well, I have a last question also. So all this disarray started to happen whenever the solar alignment went off, correct?
Yeah.
So if things were to go back in line somehow by happenstance, would there be any way that things would come back into line, like due to energy currents or however you would explain it?
Well, just like you can't go back into your mom, life goes in a linear direction. I would say after the planet has its life, it goes out into the outer solar system and sort of dies, and the cycle continues again.
So
the solar system has to be empty.
So there's never a way we're going to go back into alignment.
like
The golden age? No,
Yeah.
we're not going to go back to the golden age.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at, because like in our circles, there's a lot of the QAnon, the Trump conspiracy, where it's like we're entering the golden age. It is typically the conspiracy.
Yeah.
And so I was just kind of curious as if there was any truth to anything like that.
No, but I think we're on hell on earth right now. And with the release of all technology that's inevitable in the future, no matter who's in charge, we're potentially going to be in a heaven on earth situation. You got all this stuff that's been hidden, and energy is the key thing. Energy for health, energy for transportation, energy has been suppressed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my boy Nikola Tesla, they would have just let his research go out in the open instead of suppressing it. But
right, yeah.
Here we are, man.
Here we are. Ari, this is awesome. We're definitely going to have you on again in the future.
Absolutely.
Because you got a lot of stuff to tell.
Yeah, we're gonna bookmark it and pick back up where we left off.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Anytime.
All right, brother. Thanks for coming on.
All right, I'll see you guys.
See ya.
Later.